I really value stories told by writers who are able to go out into life and experience it and come back and help make some sense of it.
Can you explain why a writer must understand their own story before they can essentially understand any character's stories that they may invent?
My wife, Cassie, took this idea of defining moments and pushed it a step further by saying, this isn't just about concocting moments for our characters. It really begins with us understanding our own story. So when she teaches young writers, will say again and again, before you can understand your character's story, you have to understand your own story. So if we're going to understand the dynamic of the way moments can reshape us and transform us, the best place for us to look is in our own experience. We have a front row seat to our own invisible inner emotional life. And so we've got to be willing to draw on that. But before I can draw on my own life, my own defining moments, I have to actually locate them. So while I might not want to crack open an old DVD, I have to crack open my own history if I'm going to tap into the emotional riches that lie there for all of us, because we all have, in the words of author Frederick Buechner, wonderful and terrible things that have happened to us all. And so the idea is that we would look at those things. So as an example, a kind of moment that might define us would be the moment a dream was born. And so somebody who's pursuing acting, directing, writing, often that's based around a dream. And so the question that I would ask is, when was that dream born? Can you locate the moment of birth for that dream? And sometimes there is a moment, and sometimes things emerge so gradually that we can't locate a moment. We've got glaciers that creep imperceptibly, but then we also have glaciers when they reach the sea that in dramatic fashion will calve a glacier in a moment. What we're interested in as dramatists are those dramatic moments. So the tectonic plates of the earth move millimeter by millimeter over the decades, centuries, millennia. It's not that interesting to watch, but there is an instant when they rupture and we have an earthquake. Those are the dramatic moments. So there are times when changes happen in us by these gradual processes, and that we may not call those defining moments, but there are these cataclysmic, seismic moments of change that make great stories, but also really help to define how that change happened. So you might look back and say, let me locate what is that moment where I became obsessed with screenwriting? When is that moment when I had to make movies or had to make television? We also think about characters and we think about people as being broken, damaged. And so we can look back and say, not only, I know I've limped like this for a long time, but we can ask the question, when did I get that limp? What was the moment of injury? And if we understand that moment, we get a great story, but we also understand maybe if this is how it happened with me, this may be how it happens with my characters as well. And I don't only want to tell bleak stories about people being injured and damaged. I am interested in a credible kind of hope. And so I'm also interested in asking, like, was there ever a time where I grew? Was there ever a time where I healed? That I overcame a fear? What did that moment look like? And if I understand that in myself, then I'm in a position to portray that in a character, and that will be lifelike and emotionally authentic because it's rooted in something that I've actually experienced. So I think that that is the vulnerability and the cost that comes with being a storyteller, is that we have to be willing to do that dive into our own emotional story and be willing, disguised or not, to bring those stories forward. And it's tough. You go into a meeting at a studio and you sit with a producer or an executive and you pitch this character arc and you say, I think this is where this character's damage comes from. And what you're really telling is a story from your own history. You don't necessarily tell them that. But if that gets shot down, well, that's a little bit vulnerable. That's sort of a rejection of you and your pain and your past. But there's also the possibility that the producer will say, oh, that's right, something like that happened to me. And suddenly you've got a common point of reference for this character. And certainly when you are communicating with a big audience, if those moments actually make it to the screen, you've created the possibility of connection with thousands of people, millions of people, in a way that they really relate to. And when we connect at that deep level with characters, we care. We're invested emotionally in what happens to them. That's what gets us sitting on the edge of our seats. It's not just that we've got spectacular visual effects and characters zipping across the screen. If I don't care about those characters, I'm bored with even the most spectacular visual effects. If I identify with a character and deeply care what happens to them, then the tiniest movement, either toward or away from danger, I feel viscerally. So I think that's the value for writers in connecting with their own defining moments so that they can then enrich their work with the insights they gain.
In some of our comments, I've seen people mention that they didn't have anything too tragic to write about, but they were still able to portray that in their stories. And they said, I didn't come from a dysfunctional family and I had a great childhood, but there's this myth that I have to be damaged in order to be a great writer. Do you ever see people that are just too far on the spectrum? Either everything is just tragic and woe is me and there was no growth, and then others that now everything was like Disneyland.
I do encounter writers a lot who, when I ask them to find moments that have shaped them, struggle with that and often discount their life experience as boring or low stakes. And I had one student who was not a 20-year-old who came to me. I knew that she was a pediatrician, but she came to me with this problem of nothing's happened to me. And I said, well, so your career is you work in the hospital with desperately ill children and their families. I think you have experienced deeply emotional, high stakes things. And she thought about it and she said, well, I guess it's true. I am a 50-year-old woman and no man has ever loved me. And I said, then you have lots of stories. You have deep emotion. But I think we have to honor our own life experience and not dismiss it as unimportant. Now, somebody who who wallows in tragedy and damage, I think that we want more than stories of chaos. I think we do want stories that help us make sense of lives that often feel like chaos to us, at least while we're in the middle of the story. And so I really value stories told by writers who are able to go out into life and experience it and come back and help make some sense of it, even if it is not the neat Disney package. I think of Joel and Ethan Coen's No Country for Old Men. And there's not a ton of hope in that movie. There's a line about, I think it's Tommy Lee Jones who says, "You can't stop what's coming," referring to just this sort of growing evil that he was seeing in the world as a sheriff or marshal in Texas. That's kind of hopeless. You can't stop what's coming. Toward the end of the film, Tommy Lee Jones' character tells a story of riding out into the wilderness. I think it's a dream he has. He's on a horse riding out into the wilderness, and his dad has ridden out ahead of him and has lit a campfire. And he says in his dream, he's riding along and he catches sight far off in the distance of that campfire. And that's it. That's all the hope that there is in that movie. But it's enough to say, somewhere out there in the darkness, there is warmth and there is light. Keep writing. That can be, for somebody who experiences a lot of adversity, that can ring true to them in a way that a Disney movie never will. That can be credible hope. And so I value that kind of storytelling, and I would push a writer who only sees bleakness to look harder, in the same way that I would encourage a writer who only sees happiness to be more honest with themselves and own up to whatever the pain and disappointments have been. That's hard to do. I think sometimes that can only happen after some therapy and after some years have passed and we can dare to crack open the package and look inside. But I think the audience craves that kind of honesty.
I'm trying to remember back to Patch Adams. It's been a little bit since I've seen it, but speaking of a pediatrician, I think at some point it's revealed why the character wants to, bring joy to these children in sort of this clown-esque type person.
Yeah, I think there's some tragic past which keeps it from being a silly movie. It's not a silly movie. And it's the pain and the darkness that balances out the fact that he wears a clown nose to clinic. He knows something about pain. And of course, Robin Williams knew a lot about pain, was well acquainted with that. And that undergirded both his dramatic acting and his comic acting.